I'm excited to meet you this year. My name is Mrs. Moon, and I'll be teaching 9th grade geography. It can fit in other grades, so if you're in another grade taking it, don't feel bad about that. But we are studying geography this year, so I thought I'd introduce myself and tell you just a little bit about myself. I am from Kentucky, and you might notice that some of the pronunciations sound a little bit different from what you're used to hearing through the year. And also, pronunciations do vary from country to country and so on. So you can just use whatever pronunciation you're used to as we travel around the world. But I did grow up in a Christian home. My grandfather was a home missionary to Kentucky, and that's how my mother ended up there and married my father, who's from Kentucky as well. And I have an older brother and sister that I grew up with. And then after graduating, I did go to a public school, and then I graduated and went to Bob Jones University, studied education there, taught in a Christian school for several years before I came down here. When I met my husband, I finished up teaching and moved down here so that he could attend the university, and I've been working at HomeSat since then. So that's just a tiny little bit about me before we get into geography. Now, I also want to introduce you to our subject this year and our materials that we'll be using. Now, you want to have on hand every time some paper and a pencil. Those are just givens. You always want to have those, and you always want to have your textbook as well. And we do have your textbook and an activity book, which I'll go to in just a little bit. But I'm going to take a moment to introduce you to your textbook. Maybe you have flipped through it already, but maybe you haven't. In the front, you'll see some special features. First of all is your table of contents. You're familiar with that. That's in all of your books. You've learned about that a long time ago. But you can see that our book is broken down into 10 units and 29 chapters, but also notice that we have a ready reference to maps. We'll look at that in just a moment. And then towards the bottom here, if I could squeeze it in, glossary and index, which you might use at different times. So let's look at our ready reference to maps. Because it is geography, we will be using maps extensively, and if you have an atlas handy that you can use, that's good, but we do have a lot of the maps right here in the book. And you'll notice we have physical maps, and they're done continents, regions, by continents and regions there, and then also we have the culture regions, population, and notice that they're broken down to the world, North America, Latin America, not particular countries. So you should be looking at this with me because I'm sure it's too tiny for you to read. And we have our climate, world maps, and regional maps. So they're kind of broken down a little bit. Land use, languages, religions, ethnic groups, also miscellaneous world map, any of the other maps that don't fit into these major categories. Major empires, former European colonies, historical maps, maps of the United States. Okay, so notice that you don't normally see any map of a particular country or a particular state, but they're area maps, regional maps. Unusual features, political maps, and of course our miscellaneous. Okay, so notice we have miscellaneous and miscellaneous world maps. That's just to familiarize you with that a little bit in case you're looking for a map, you can find it easily. Then we do have our pronunciation guide. A lot of times they'll tell you how to pronounce a word. Not every time though. They don't tell every, if so, then we would all pronounce them all the same. But some of them are different, or some of them don't have a pronunciation. But any of the more unusual ones, they try to give you a pronunciation for that. So you can see here we have our symbols and the example. Okay, now what we have here is that if it's in capital letters, that's the primary stress, large capital letters. And they give you a sample word that should be something that you're familiar with. Even if you just look at gentle, gentle, scent. So if they're one syllable, they're going to be the smaller letters. You can see a little bit of a difference there. Okay, so if you're looking to pronounce something, just be aware that their key might be a little bit different from the dictionary you're used to using. Okay, and that will help you in your pronunciations. Okay, then in the back of your book, we're going to look just briefly at our index and glossary. These are things that can really help you in studying, and you should have learned how to use these different tools in probably English or some other class where you study. Okay, your glossary of commonly used terms. If you're not sure about something, you can look it up. They don't have pronunciations, but they do have some brief definitions. Now, they don't have a definition of every word that you're going to see in bold in your textbook, but just some of the main ones, all right? Then you also have your index, and that can be very helpful as well. Here, if you're looking for a particular country, then you can just find it right in the index, Africa, okay? And then they give you some divisions that you also might want to look under, something more specific, what area of Africa. So you'll need to know a little bit to look something up, okay? And those can be very helpful with you. You can take some time, maybe after class or if you have a break, to just look through and see what other features are there in your textbook. Now, the other book that we'll be using this year is the activity manual. And this is, I love this manual. This is really great. So hopefully you have this on hand. If not, you'll miss out a little bit, but it's a great book. And it just has also the same table of contents and activities for every chapter. They are done by chapter and activity, so there'll be two numbers like 3-1, 5-1, and so on. And that's just a book that you can work right in. It's like a workbook. You can rip the pages out and work in those. So you always want to have your activity manual handy, and I'll try to let you know at the beginning what activity you'll need for that day or what map exercise. That's our final material that we use. And for these, this is just practice and maps. This is nice because they already have it outlined for you. I don't know about you, but when I was in school, I was always tracing over the map, so I'd have a blank map so I could practice putting all of the countries in. And they've already got that done for you, so it's really nice. And there's one map per chapter, so we won't use that as frequently, but again, have those somewhere nearby, and I'll let you know which ones you need and when you need them. Other than that, we use other materials sometimes like colored pencils or blank paper, and if there are specific materials like that, I'll let you know about those in our advanced organizer. And this is what I will generally be starting with. I'm taking a little bit longer today just to get you introduced to everything, but during our advanced organizer, I just let you know what's coming in our lesson that day so you can have everything organized ahead of time, so you're not stopping the program and running here and running there and trying to get everything together that you're going to need. So our materials, in addition to your textbooks and textbook and activity book, you'll want to have a copy of I Sing the Mighty Power of God by Isaac Watts. If you have a copy of the music, that would be helpful. The words are actually in your textbook. Also, you'll need a piece of blank paper and some colored pencils handy. Okay, then I'll go through our agenda. That's all that is what we're going to be covering, what I'm planning to cover in our lesson today. I don't always get to everything, but I try to cram it all in. All right, today we're talking about our topics and approaches for geography. So what do we study in geography? We'll be talking about our goals for this class and for the year. I'll hopefully introduce you to our first unit and first chapter. And then you'll be doing a little artwork by drawing a map. Yeah, going to have to work a little bit even on the first day. Now, normally during the agenda, I'll also mention our main idea and our goals for the day as well. But today, I'm going to spend some extended time talking about our goals for the year. So I'm just going to go ahead and do the goals in another section in just a minute. First, I'll give you a brief summary of our topics and approaches. Now, our topics covered this year include a survey of the Earth and its resources. Okay, so it's not just memorizing where all the countries are on the map. There's a little bit more to it than that. Also, we'll be covering the use of the Earth's resources by man. So it's not just the maps and it's not just the resources, but we also get into talking about people and cultures. And we want to learn about the geographic and cultural features of people. You know, what makes people different? Why are cultures different? Well, it's connected in some part to geography. So we'll be studying people this year as well. Now, there are two basic approaches to studying geography. And it's not important for you to memorize them or anything, but I'm just going to tell you how our course is laid out for this year. The first approach is the systematic approach, and that's where you talk about your physical geography, your climate, economics, society, you know, all of those things, population, culture, history, government, all of those fit into the systematic study. You talk about each little thing individually. And our first 5 chapters are like that. We'll be learning the basic terms. You know, what terms do we use when we're talking about government or economics or people or the physical features of the land? We'll be learning all those terms as a foundation. Think of that as our foundation for the whole rest of the year, because after that, we're going to the regional approach. And you can probably guess what that is. We'll just be traveling from region to region. We'll start in the United States, and then we'll move on to different areas, Canada and Mexico and Europe and so on. And we'll study each region applying what we've learned about climate and economics and so on. Okay? So you can see that the first 5 chapters are going to be really important. We're going to be referring back to these concepts throughout the year as we visit different places. So that's why it's important for you to know, not to memorize, oh, there's systematic and there's regional, and what does each, cover. That's not the important thing, but the idea is if you miss something in the first 5 chapters, it's going to come up again. So just make sure that you get a really good foundation here at the beginning. And when we go to the different regions, we'll study that region and the application of our systematic concepts. All right, so we'll be applying those throughout the year. Then we're going to look at our goals for the year. Now, our basic comprehension goal is for you to be able to produce a clear mental map of the main countries and regions of the world. So when I talk about China, boom, you know it's over here. When I talk about the United States, boom, you know it's over there. Okay, so you have an idea, you're not going, China, where is that? You have an idea of where to look on the map in general. And you probably already have that, but we're going to be getting more specific. Okay, we'll learn some general and then build on that and get more specific. And you should be able to identify a lot of the geographical features, such as the 4 oceans and 7 continents. Okay, you probably already know that, but we're also going to be learning about their major physical features. So we're going to learn the major seas, the major mountains and ranges, the major islands, the major lakes, and the major rivers. Okay, of the world. Now that might sound like, wow, that's so big. But when you'll see it on the map, you'll see, oh, there aren't really that many major lakes in the world, okay, that are really of world proportions. Okay, there are tons of lakes in the world, but we're learning just the major ones. Okay, then we also want to learn the 8 world culture regions and their primary characteristics. So you know what a certain area would be like. Take Asia or the Middle East or something. We'll be learning the physical geography. A little bit about the history. Okay, it's not a history class, but you need to connect some certain events with some certain areas. What's their religion there? What language does that area speak generally? What ethnic groups live there? What are their politics like? Are they democratic? Do they have a monarchy? What's their economy? Are they a third world country? Okay, so you want to know some general things about all of these places. Also, we're going to learn about regions within those regions, and that's simply subregions, okay? And we'll also be learning every country in the world and every major city and capital in the world. And once again, don't let that scare you. We're going to be tackling it a little by little and reviewing a lot throughout the year, so that by the end of this year, that's going to be so easy. And there are going to be a lot of them that you already know you've learned probably from history classes and other classes. Then we're also going to learn regions within each major country. For example, in the United States, we have the South, we have the West, we have the Midwest, we have the Northeast. Okay, so a lot of those you're going to be familiar with already. So you need to identify all of those, and a lot of that is memorization. Okay, so that is just something that you're going to have to review. Don't leave it till the night before the test to try to, I'm going to learn every country and every capital. That would be too difficult. All right, then we have some things, I have some things that I want you to be able to associate. All right, you should be able to associate these features with each major country with the country they come from. Okay, for example, major land and water features. So if I say, where are the Great Lakes? You know they're in the United States. You need to associate famous buildings. Eiffel Tower, you know that's in France, or Paris, France. Famous people. Okay, so if I say Bach, you know what country he came from. World-changing events. Okay, and those things are most of those are going to be ones that you have already studied before anyway. All right, so you need to associate those with their appropriate major country. Then we do have some specific geographical skills that we'll be working on. And first of all, you need to be able to interpret basic types of maps. And those would include physical or relief maps, climate maps, land use maps, population maps. And we looked at the map contents already, so you saw that there are lots of different types of maps. We'll be working with those maps throughout the year, and you'll need to be able to get information from them. So when you look at the map, you're not saying, so what is this telling me? When you look at it, oh, the population is this, here's where it's most populated, here's where it's least populated. You need to be able to read those maps. Also, you need to be able to define and use basic geographic terms. That's a given. No big deal there. Interpret common geographic tools. And I wrote down charts. That's one example. Geographers also use things like topographical maps, climographs, flowcharts, cartograms, and those will be things that you'll be exposed to throughout the year, and we'll be studying those. Also, describe limits of maps in representing reality. Every map, every flat map, or probably just every map, is going to have some type of distortion. We can't take a round Earth, put it on a flat map without distorting something. Okay, so that's a key feature that we'll be learning about here at the very beginning. Also, compare and contrast different regions that we study. How does the Northeast differ from the Midwest? Show how geography affects man's activities. Okay, so what is the relationship between the physical geography of where a person lives and what the people there actually do? What's the human activity? How do they relate? How do they affect each other? How does the geography affect the politics or the economics? You know, would the desert, living in the desert, affect a country's economics differently from a country that's located on a lush plain? All right, so you have to see how those relate. Also, geography affects people's culture, okay? So that's something that we want to connect. Another skill is to explain causes of modern conflicts. You might be thinking, that sounds like history class, but we will touch, it's all related. It's all tied in together, and you'll learn that the more we study this year. Also, you need to evaluate social and political systems biblically. So we'll use the Bible to evaluate any country's social and political systems. And also, you should know how missions work is affected by some of the factors we'll be learning about and the different challenges missionaries have on the field. Another thing is that we hear a lot of geographical facts or facts about other countries in news reports, and you'll need to learn how to evaluate those this year. And when you read the news, how does that affect you? How does it affect the world? Evaluate what you're reading or hearing in the news about these different countries. And then we also have a big goal is a conceptual idea to show how physical geography, culture and history, and politics and countries are interrelated. And so that's why when you hear some of these goals, you might think, well, that sounds like it should be history, or that sounds like economics. It's all kind of interrelated. We're going to focus mainly on where the countries are, what are their physical features, but all of these other things tie in to geography and the different countries. And then, of course, I do have some spiritual goals for you this year, some specific goals. These aren't, ones that you have to write down or anything like that, but an obvious goal is to praise the Lord for creating the world. And we talk a little bit about creation in our opening chapter, and the fact that it is created by a sovereign God. And of course, we want to learn to use the resources. That's part of our study. What are the Earth's resources? How do humans on the Earth use those resources? We want to use them to God's glory. We don't want to abuse them, nor do we want to make them more important than people. Okay, but we want to have a balance there. And we know that all people reflect God's image, whether they're Christian people or not. And that's something that we need to be aware of as we study people from all over the earth, people that are different from us, that believe differently and live differently than we would live or do live. Also to evaluate current systems of family and government based on the Bible's standard. And that would include evaluating our own nation. And of course, we need to recognize that man's fallen nature has caused the world's conflicts. And there are always going to be conflicts. I know people would like to have peace, and there's a lot of talk about peace and world peace, but there are always going to be conflicts as long as there are sinful men living here on the earth. And we need to recognize that the governments that are put in charge of us are God's instruments. There are several scriptures, I won't cite any of them now, but they're God's instruments for blessing to those that do right and for punishment to those that do wrong. And so that's just kind of, I know I'm throwing a lot at you, but that's the big picture of what we're headed for this year. So it gives you a little idea of what am I in for in geography this year. And our first unit is about the world as God made it. So you can tell even in the title that we take a creationist view based on Scripture, that God made the world. Why did He make it? To be man's home. It's a home for man and for man to use. And a lot of times today, the earth itself is glorified. And while man is secondary, we have to, save the earth and protect the earth. But we have to have a balance there. God made the world to be man's home. And the earth provides for man's physical needs, supplies for industries, jobs, and also, we don't want to forget that it does give pleasure. There's a great deal of beauty in the world, and hopefully you'll be exposed to a lot of that beauty and variety throughout the year, this year. Our first 3 chapters are in this unit about the world that God made. First of all, our first chapter is just kind of introduction to geography and map reading and some basic terms. And then our second chapter is about God's natural forces that shape and change the earth. So we're talking about the surface of the earth. And then our third chapter is about God's natural forces that move heat and water. Okay, so that's what we're going to be covering during this section, or during this unit. And also, we have a little, I don't know if I should call it a theme song or not, but it's our song for the year. And we're going to be singing it periodically, and so I hope you're not afraid to sing out nicely. And it is entitled, I Sing the Mighty Power of God. That's why I said if you have the music to that, you might want to gather that at the beginning when I went over the materials. But we do have the words to it in your textbook on page 9. It's Roman numeral 9, so that you can look at it and follow along. And I'll also have each phrase on the screen for you as we go along. And we're going to be singing this at the beginning of each new unit. So that's only 10 times altogether, but hopefully by the end of the year you'll have this song learned by heart. I sing the mighty power of God.
Sing the mighty power of God that made the mountains rise, that spread the flowing seas abroad and built the lofty skies. I sing the wisdom that ordained the sun to rule the day. The moon shines full at His command, and all the stars obey. I sing the goodness of the Lord, that filled the earth with fullness.
I hope you enjoyed that. It might be one you knew before, but if not, you'll know that by the end of our school year this year. That brings us into our first chapter of Unit 1, Chapter 1, which is Geography, Finding Our Place in the World. We are going to have a key verse for each chapter that we'll be learning. We'll be starting each lesson with this verse. So go ahead and read with me our verse, Isaiah 45:18. For thus saith the Lord that created the heavens, God himself that formed the earth and made it. He hath established it. He created it not in vain. He formed it to be inhabited. I am the Lord, and there is none else. And we can see from that, again, that reiterates our theme, our idea that God made the world for man's home. And our main idea for this chapter is that man has developed the field of geography to help him find his place in the earth. And our goals for this chapter are to define universal geographic terms, learn the history and purpose of geography, and also recognize that the field of geography is constantly changing and improving. We also need to know that maps show latitude, longitude, and altitude. You probably already know that. Be able to locate places on a map using latitude and longitude. Interpret a relief map. Identify the types of map projections. Explain map distortion, why it exists, and how to reduce it. And I'll be sharing specific goals with you each lesson, just to refresh your memory what our goal is. But at this time, I want you to pause the program, have your blank sheet of paper and your pencil there, and draw a world map without looking at anything else, and fill in as much detail as you can on your world map. Pause the program. All right, how did you do? You can look in your textbook on page 1 to find a world map. This actually has physical features on it as well. And compare your world map from memory to this world map. I won't take a lot of time on that, but you can spend some time after class comparing and see what all you might have left out, or maybe you have some things on there that aren't on this map. But when have you seen maps before in everyday life? Probably maybe at amusement parks, you're here at the mall, or in atlases, textbooks, if you've been on a trip, in a plane, on the news, places like that. And we'll be looking at a lot more maps this year so you can fill in any gaps in your knowledge. But we're out of time for today, so let's look at your assignment. I want you to work on Activity 1-1, which is about the travels of Marco Polo. And we're going to end with a little geography question. See if you can find the answer before next time. Where in the world is most of the world's fresh water?